He owned the hotel that refused him a room. A tired father walked into a five-star hotel at midnight with his sleeping daughter on his shoulder. And within 10 minutes, the staff had called security to throw him out of a building he owned every floor of. Adrian Cole hadn't planned on stopping here tonight. 2 months working overseas does something to a man, makes him crave the smallest, simplest comforts. A hot shower, a real bed, the sound of his daughter breathing steadily beside him. His flight had landed late. Driving another 40 minutes home in that state felt reckless, so he made the call without ceremony, the way he made most decisions. He knew exactly where they'd go, the Halcyon Park, flagship property of Cole Hospitality, the hotel he'd spent 11 years building from one struggling property into the company's crown jewel. He'd cut the ribbon himself, stood on that marble floor, and told his first team this place would represent everything he believed about how people deserve to be treated. He hadn't been back in 5 months. He hadn't called ahead. That was deliberate. Adrian had a habit of visiting his own properties dressed down, unannounced, no watch, no luggage that screamed money. It was the only honest way to see what happened inside his buildings when nobody thought the boss was watching. His father had spent 2 decades on hotel night shifts, and something he used to say had never left Adrian. The way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter tells you everything about it. Not the people it's trying to impress, but the ones it thinks it can afford to ignore. His daughter, Nora, 6 years old, had fallen asleep somewhere over the ocean and hadn't fully woken since. She had her mother's eyelashes and her father's stubbornness. One arm looped loosely around his neck, a small stuffed rabbit named Pepper tucked under her chin. Adrian carried her through the revolving doors. The lobby was exactly as he remembered, a warm light on polished stone, the soft drift of piano from the bar, a long front desk staffed by a single clerk at this hour. He'd approved every inch of this design himself. The clerk, a young man in his late 20s with a name tag reading Glenn, looked up from his screen. Something shifted in his face, not dramatic, just a quiet recalibration, the look of someone whose eyes had already delivered a verdict to his brain. He took in the worn jacket, the sleeping child, the screen again. "Good evening," Adrian said. "I need a room for tonight, 1 night, 2 guests, nothing fancy." Glenn's eyes lingered on the screen a beat too long before he looked up and leaned in, pitching his voice just loud enough for the nearby seating area to catch it. "Sir, this really isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." The words landed with a particular weight, not shouted, not cruel, just quiet and certain, the tone people use when they want humiliation to feel inevitable rather than personal. A woman at a nearby table glanced over. Adrian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Glenn. "I'm asking for a room, that's all." "I'm sorry, sir, we're fully booked tonight, no availability." "Nothing at all, I don't need a suite. A standard room, we just need somewhere to sleep." Glenn repeated himself with the smooth patience of a man who'd said this line many times. "Fully booked, sir. There are other hotels nearby that might accommodate you." Adrian said nothing for a moment. He studied Glenn's face, not with anger, but with the quiet attention of a man cataloging exactly what he was seeing. Then, less than 3 minutes later, the doors opened behind him. A couple walked in, the man in a blazer, the woman in a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. They moved like people who'd never once been told no. Glenn's posture changed instantly, shoulders back, smile wide and immediate. "Welcome to the Halcyon Park. Do you have a reservation with us this evening?" They didn't. They were walk-ins, exactly like Adrian. Within 4 minutes, Glenn had booked the room, run the card, and handed over 2 keys with a warmth that filled the whole counter. Adrian watched all of it without a word. He didn't need one. The message had already been delivered, and both men understood it perfectly, even if only one would admit it. Nora stirred against his shoulder, voice muffled and half asleep. "Daddy, are we at the hotel yet?" "We're here, baby, just give me a minute." He turned back to the desk, his voice level. "I'd like to speak to your manager, please." Glenn's smoothness cracked slightly. He picked up the desk phone, made a short call. Adrian waited, scanning the lobby, guests in the lounge chairs. A young woman at the concierge desk pretending to organize papers while clearly tracking everything, the soft piano still playing. He'd built this place to feel like a sanctuary. He wondered, not for the first time, what happens to the things you build once you hand them to someone else to run. The manager arrived 2 minutes later. Patricia, mid-40s, the kind of woman who wears authority like a uniform she's polished too many times. She'd clearly been briefed before she even reached the desk. She didn't arrive with questions. She arrived with a conclusion. "Sir," she said, positioning herself beside Glenn so the two of them faced Adrian like a wall. I understand there's some confusion. My staff has already explained we have no availability. There's nothing further I can do. There's no confusion, Adrian said. I watched your staff book a room for a walk-in couple while telling me there was nothing. I'd like you to explain that. Patricia's expression hardened, the particular hardness of someone challenged by a person they'd already decided didn't deserve an answer. My staff exercised their professional judgment. I stand behind it. Your professional judgment. Adrian repeated it slowly and let the silence stretch. He thought of his father, 22 years of night shifts, a uniform worn thin at the elbows, the way he'd come home and sit at the kitchen table in silence before he could be himself again. His father had never been bitter about it. Just tired, in a way young Adrian had understood even as a boy. What his father gave him wasn't anger. It was clarity. And standing here now in the lobby of his own flagship hotel, holding his sleeping daughter, that clarity settled over him like something solid. He wasn't going to reveal himself yet. He needed to see how far this would go, not for his own satisfaction, but because if this was happening here, at the property meant to set the standard for every other hotel in his company. He needed to understand the full shape of it before deciding what to do. I'd like your full name and exact title, for the record. Patricia gave both without warmth. Adrian noted them quietly, then stepped back, found a chair, and settled Nora against him to wait. He wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Patricia hadn't gone back to wherever managers disappear to at midnight. She stationed herself near the front desk, arms crossed, watching Adrian the way you watch a problem you haven't figured out how to remove yet. Every few minutes her eyes swept across the lobby to where he sat with Nora still asleep against him, and each glance carried the same unspoken line. You're still here, and I wish you weren't. Adrian noticed everything. He noticed Patricia lean over and murmur something to Glenn that made the younger man straighten his spine like he'd been caught. He noticed the concierge, a young woman whose name tag read Bridget, keeping her eyes fixed on her desk while her hands had gone completely still. He noticed two guests at the lounge bar who'd gone quiet, their attention drifting toward him without quite committing to it. The lobby had developed a particular kind of tension, the kind that forms when people sense something is wrong and are waiting for someone else to be the one to say so out loud. Adrian had seen this shape before, not in his own building, but enough times in his life to recognize it instantly. The tension of people who know an injustice is happening and have each, privately, decided it isn't their place to interrupt it. Patricia made her move eventually. She crossed the lobby with the measured walk of someone performing authority rather than holding it, stopping a few feet from Adrian's chair and lowering her voice to the register designed to sound discreet while still being heard by everyone nearby. Sir, I've given you time and I want to be straightforward. This is private property. We've told you we can't accommodate you tonight, and continuing to sit in this lobby isn't something we're going to allow. Adrian looked up at her unhurried. I'm sitting in a chair. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't disrupted anything. You don't have grounds to ask me to leave. I'm not asking, Patricia said. Something shifted in the room. A glass came down a little too hard at the bar. Bridget's head lifted slightly, then dropped again. Adrian studied Patricia's face, the total undisturbed certainty of someone who had never once entertained the idea that she might be wrong, and felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, something older and more deliberate than anger. Then call security, he said. I want this on record. Patricia's jaw tightened. She gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby, where two security guards had clearly been waiting for exactly that signal. They crossed the floor with the patient heaviness of men who'd done this before, taking up position on either side of Adrian's chair. That was the exact moment Nora woke up. She came back to consciousness the way children do, not gradually, but all at once, blinking into the light and taking in the whole scene in a single sweep. The guards, the tension in her father's arms, Patricia's face. She sat up straighter, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest, and looked at the two large men beside her chair with the plain, unguarded curiosity of someone who hasn't yet learned to pretend she doesn't notice things. Then she looked directly at Patricia. Why are you making us leave? Her voice was clear, unhurried, carrying easily across the quiet lobby, past the bar, past the couple near the elevator, past Bridget at her desk. Patricia didn't answer her. She looked at Adrian instead, which was its own kind of answer. Nora considered this with the methodical seriousness of a 6-year-old working through a problem that didn't add up. If they don't want us here, she said, why do they work at a hotel? Isn't their job to help people? There was no accusation in it. It was a sincere question, the kind only a child asks when the behavior of adults simply fails to make sense. but sincere questions, asked plainly in a quiet room, land harder than anything rehearsed. The couple by the elevator turned fully around. The guests at the bar stopped pretending to look elsewhere. One of the security guards shifted his weight, visibly uncomfortable with where he was standing. Bridget went still, eyes fixed on a spot on her desk, hands flat against the surface. Adrian looked down at his daughter and kept his voice warm, and even the voice he used when he wanted her to know the world's unfairness was never her fault. "You didn't do anything wrong, Nora. Not one thing." He held her gaze until she nodded. Then he straightened and looked back at Patricia. Her certainty was still there, but something underneath it had cracked not into doubt, but into irritation. The question had drawn attention she hadn't wanted, shifted the room in a way she couldn't immediately undo. And her response, like a lot of people who feel control slipping, was to grip tighter. "This has gone on long enough," she said, all pretense of hospitality gone from her voice. She looked at the guards. "Escort them out." The first guard stepped forward. Adrian rose slowly, careful with Nora, keeping her close against his side. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. But he didn't move toward the door either, not yet. He stood in the middle of his own lobby with his daughter beside him, looking at Patricia like a man who'd seen everything he came to see and was now simply deciding what to do with it. Phones had quietly appeared throughout the room. Adrian stood there a moment longer, Nora's small hand curled into his jacket, and then he spoke, not louder, just clearer. "Before your guards touch me, I want you to know who you're escorting out." He reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, so nobody would mistake the motion for anything else, and pulled out a single key card. Not a room key. A master access card, the kind only a handful of people in the entire company carried, the Cole Hospitality crest etched into the corner of it where the light caught it. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said. "I own this hotel. I own the building you're standing in, the uniforms you're wearing, and the contract that pays both your salaries." The lobby went silent in the particular way a room goes silent when something has just become irreversible. Glenn's face drained of color first. Patricia's didn't move for a second, and then it did, all at once, the certainty collapsing like something load-bearing had been pulled out from underneath it. "That's," she started. "You can check," Adrian said. "Call the corporate line, ask for verification, I'll wait." She didn't call. She didn't need to. Something in his stillness, in the way the guards had already taken a half step back without being told to, told her everything she needed to know. "Mr. Cole, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. I didn't realize." "You didn't need to realize who I was to treat me decently," Adrian said. "That's the entire point. You decided who I was the moment you saw a tired man in a worn jacket carrying a sleeping child. You didn't ask. You assumed. And then you spent the next 20 minutes proving that assumption right to yourself, one decision at a time." He looked past her to Glenn, who hadn't moved from behind the desk. "You checked in a couple in cashmere coats in under 4 minutes. You told a man holding his sleeping daughter there was nothing available. There was a room. You just decided I wasn't the kind of person who got to have it." Glenn opened his mouth and closed it again, no defense in him that would survive the room he was standing in. Adrian turned back to Patricia. "You didn't ask questions either. You came to that desk with your mind already made up, and when I asked you to explain a simple discrepancy, you told me you stood behind your staff's judgment. I'd like to know what judgment was that exactly." Patricia said nothing. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. "I built this place because of a man who spent 22 years on a night shift very much like Glenn's, and who came home every night a little smaller because of how people like you decided to treat him," Adrian said. "I didn't open the Halcyon Park to become the kind of place that does to other families what was done to mine. And tonight, it did exactly that in my own lobby to my own daughter." He turned to the head of security, a man named Ortiz who'd been standing quietly by the elevators through the entire exchange, clearly uneasy with the assignment he'd been given. "Mr. Ortiz, I'd like a full incident report, timestamps, the booking log, everyone who was on shift tonight. Tomorrow morning, not next week." "Yes, sir. Right away." Adrian looked once more at Patricia, and his voice, when it came, wasn't cruel, just final. "You're relieved of your position effective tonight. HR will have the paperwork by morning. I'd like you to gather your things and leave the property." "Mr. Cole, please, I have a family. So does the next man you would have turned away tomorrow night," Adrian said. "I'm not interested in being cruel to you, Patricia, but I built this hotel to be better than this. And I won't keep someone in a leadership role who needed a key card before she remembered what that means." He didn't fire Glenn on the spot. Instead, he asked him to stay, not as punishment, but as something closer to an assignment. "You're going to keep your job tonight," Adrian told him quietly. "But you're going to spend tomorrow telling me honestly what made you decide I wasn't worth a room before you'd even heard my name. Not because I want an apology, because I want to understand how a kid with good instincts somewhere underneath all this learned to make that call so fast. That's a training problem, and it's mine to fix, not just yours to be ashamed of." Glenn nodded, throat tight, unable to manage words yet. Nora tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "can we go to bed now?" Adrian laughed softly, the first easy sound he'd made since walking through the doors, and picked her back up. "Yeah, baby. Let's go to bed." He carried her past the front desk, past Bridget, who looked up at him with something like relief, past the lounge where a few guests were still holding their phones, unsure whether what they'd just watched was real. He didn't take a free suite or make a show of it. He checked himself into a standard room, exactly the one he'd asked for from the start. And by the time the elevator doors closed, the lobby had already begun, quietly, to talk. By morning, the story had made its way through every department in the building, not because Adrian told it, but because rooms like that one don't stay quiet for long. Patricia was gone before the morning shift started. Glenn kept his job, and 3 months later, when corporate rolled out a new guest equity training program across every Cole hospitality property, it was built in part around the incident report Ortiz had filed that night. Adrian never mentioned it publicly. He didn't need to. He'd already said the only thing that mattered, standing in his own lobby at midnight, holding his daughter. The way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter tells you everything you need to know about it. He'd learned that from his father. That night in the building he built to prove it true, he made sure it stayed that way. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been judged before anyone bothered to ask who you really were? Let us know in the comments, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.